Ari has laid out 10. Let's start off with voter suppression. Because when I heard Donald Trump say electoral reform, I was talking to Lev Parnas, who was a former Trump fixer, and Lev and I said, okay, voter suppression. That's what that means to me. Tried and true voter suppression. How are Republicans going to work with Donald Trump to try to use voter suppression to rig the 2026 midterms? Because right now, folks, it seems pretty clear anything could change that they're going to lose the House. And furthermore, the Senate, they might even lose the Senate because Democrats are fielding some strong candidates. So he's in danger of losing not just the House, but also the Senate to Democrats. Ari.
So there's a lot he's doing and trying to do federally to nationalize voter suppression, because we all know voter suppression is happening already at the state level in all these Republican-controlled states, places like North Carolina and Texas and Florida. They've been doing this for many, many years. What Trump is trying to do is inject the powers of the presidency to control elections, which has never really happened before, because the Constitution is very clear that it is the states and Congress that set the rules for elections. But Trump is trying to go much further. So you may remember back in March, he tried to issue an executive order that would have changed elections in a lot of different ways. One of the things he wanted to do was basically make everyone have a passport or a birth certificate to register to vote. That is not voter ID. That's really important to point out. That is not having a driver's license. That's asking people to have documents that they don't carry around with them on a regular basis, and that many people don't have or don't have easy access to, just to register to vote. So,
well, also, according to Donald Trump, he was asked to bring his license plate to vote. So if you remember that.
So he tried to do that. He tried to do a bunch of other things, throw out ballots if they arrived after Election Day, even if they were postmarked before Election Day. He did this crazy thing where he basically said that there needs to be new certification on voting machines, but the certifications he wanted weren't actually available. So basically, states are now required to get voting machines that don't actually exist, which of course is just a pretext for him to say that this is all rigged, right? That they voted on corrupt voting machines, the election was rigged, and to call foul. So this is all what he tried to do in March. That was blocked by the courts. But now he's moving through with another executive order, hasn't come out yet, but we're expecting it any time, to try to ban mail voting, to get rid of voting machines, things that he doesn't have the power to do. But the problem here is that every time he pushes the envelope and tries to do one of these crazy things, let's say he puts like 15 crazy policies in executive order, even if the courts block it, they might not block all of it, right? They might block like 10 of the 15 things, so then 5 crazy things get through. And even if they don't get through, he's sending a message to states, I want you to do these kind of things. I want you to not certify the votes if we don't like the voting machines. I want you to throw out mail ballots. And we've already seen with the gerrymandering, states are going to comply when Trump leans on Republicans, they do what he wants. And so this is something that we've never really seen before, a president basically using his power to make it so that people he doesn't like can't vote.
And he's openly said it, folks. He said, I want 100 seats. And he told Texas, I want 5 seats. Texas did it. Now Missouri's doing it. Just breaking news from an hour ago. It's open gerrymandering, right? Open voter suppression. And speaking on mail-in ballots, can you talk to us about mail-in ballots? Just set the record straight, because I want people to be informed about, who uses mail-in ballots, why it's legal, why Republicans depend on mail-in ballots.
Yeah, I mean, tens of millions of people use mail-in ballots. It was actually something that was used more by Republicans than Democrats until 2020, because Republican constituencies are more likely to need mail-in ballots. They are older, they live in more rural areas, and those are the kind of people that have used mail-in voting. It was only in 2020, when Democrats took the pandemic more seriously than Republicans and started voting by mail, that Trump suddenly had a problem with it. But if you look at who pushed for mail-in voting in places like Florida, who pushed for mail-in voting in places like Utah, it was Republicans who did this. They used this to try to increase voter turnout. Trump wrongly blames it for losing in 2020. Ironically, one of the reasons why Republicans did better in 2024 was they urged people to go back to voting by mail. They told their voters, vote early, vote by mail. And now what's happening is Trump is trying to go back on that. And that would be bad for democracy. I also think it would be bad for the Republican Party as well. But Trump remains fixated on this, even though People have this idea that like anyone gets a mail ballot. Um, that's not how it works. First off, in states that automatically send you mail ballots, which is not that many states, you have to be registered to vote. So first
Yep.
off, you've already had to clear the hurdle of registering. Then your ballot has to be verified by people. So again, this is always made, they always make it sound like they're picking up all these mail ballots from like nursing homes or somewhere and they're dumping them in drop boxes and no one's monitoring the process. But like the same kind of procedures exist for mail voting that exists for in-person voting. It's just that your people are verifying your information remotely as opposed to in person. But there's nothing inherently fraudulent about mail voting compared to regular voting. It's just one of many ways that voting has been made more convenient.
And so those are the two things, right? First and foremost, the attack on a constitutional and legal way of voting, but also, a st- I mean, you have to take the small wins where you can. He might be handicapping his own base, which is why there's a little bit of resistance among these red states, and they're hoping he just moves on from it. But like you said, what Donald Trump says goes because a lot of these rural voters need mail-in voting, right? And also our armed services, our members of our armed armies who are serving overseas, they depend on mail-in voting, right? Another thing that some Republicans are now skittish about, but like you said, they're bending the knee, is gerrymandering. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, after Texas said yes, they tried to pressure Ohio. And there was a little bit of a report that came out in Ohio. The Republicans were like, this might not be good for us. Talk to us about, nonetheless, his attempt to go all in with gerrymandering.
Well, this is also insane and totally unprecedented because redistricting is supposed to happen at the beginning of the decade after the census. That's how it works. The only other time that I can remember it happening without some kind of court order was when Texas did it in 2003. You may remember this. Tom DeLay, the House Majority leader, leaned on Texas to redraw its maps mid-decade after the state had shifted from a Democratic legislature to a Republican legislature. And he basically argued Texas was more Republican than its seats in Congress, which it kind of was. I mean, I'm not justifying what DeLay did, but there was some kind of justification for what he was saying. That was the only time it had happened. The idea that the president would basically say to Texas, we need 5 more seats. That
Yep.
had never happened before from a president. And then not just that, but going basically state by state by state. I mean, this is essentially the Stop the Steal effort of
Yep.
2025, where he did the same thing when he tried to overturn the election. He had Michigan and Pennsylvania and Arizona. He did a pressure campaign on all these state legislators. They couldn't overturn the election because it was illegal and impossible. But the gerrymandering is theoretically legal. We'll see if it stands up in court. But according to this Supreme Court, partisan gerrymandering, basically drawing districts to discriminate against people based on their party affiliation, the Supreme Court has basically said there's nothing wrong with that. So that's another example of how the courts have rigged democracy. So the idea that it's Texas, that it's Missouri, then it's Indiana, then it's Florida, then it's Kansas. I mean, apparently they're inviting leaders of the Nebraska legislature to the White House today. I mean, this is such an insanely crazy thing. And again, it's just another way that Trump is normalizing things that are totally abnormal. I mean, you can imagine the response that Biden started basically said to Illinois, hey, I want you to just suddenly redraw your map so you could give me 5 more seats. I mean, they would have automatically impeached him for doing something like that. And Trump is just doing it in every state he can.
It's because with the complicity of the Supreme Court, and I had Professor Littman on right before you, and I strongly recommend people listening to that conversation how the Supreme Court is helping Donald Trump effectuate these straight up unconstitutional, illegal, authoritarian power grabs. Just yesterday, the same Supreme Court who said race should not be a factor in trying to, democratize education and give people a chance to attend university said, hey, go ahead and racially profile and go against these brown folks in LA as part of the emergency docket. And I think this is where Democrats need to play fire with fire, because I think you and I are on the same boat that gerrymandering, no bueno. But if this is what they're going to do, and I predicted, and it's the world's worst, I told you so, that as soon as Donald Trump told Texas to give him 5 seats, I said every single other Republican House of every other red state is going to bend the knee. And so you need to respond. And will the Supreme Court then say, California, you can't do it, but Missouri, you can? They probably will,
They
Ari. They
very well,
probably
they
will.
very well might. Yeah, I mean, allowing Republicans to unilaterally rig the system is much worse than responding in kind so that there's some kind of fairness at the end of the day. Now, I'm uncomfortable with this as a long-term strategy for democracy. I think a gerrymandering race to the bottom will be bad
Yep.
for voters everywhere. I don't think anyone could argue otherwise with a straight face. But it's crazy to me that people are criticizing California for responding to Texas. What else is California supposed to do? This is already a state where they have sent unprovoked the National Guard and the military into their largest cities. Now, the thing that disturbs me a little bit is that Republicans are still going state by state by state. Second state
Yep.
is Missouri. Third state could be Indiana, Ohio. We don't know where it's going to end, Florida. But what's the next state for Democrats? I keep hearing them saying we're considering it. Why are they not moving in
Because
Illinois?
they're
Why are they
weak.
not
They're
moving
weak,
in
Ari. They're
Maryland?
weak.
You know what I mean? They like in Maryland, they're worried about a court overturning it. The Republicans aren't worried about the courts overturning it. They're like, we're going to do it, and the courts can try to stop us, but we're going to do it regardless. And so it is true that Republicans have more power at the state level. They control more states. Therefore, they can do more gerrymandering. And this is one of the reasons why I've argued for years that the Democrats should spend more time investing at the state level. But the fact is, Democrats still control 15 states, one party government in 15 states. So they have 15 states where they can do something about this problem, assuming they have more than one member of Congress and assuming they're not all Democrats. And so I think the Democrats could be more aggressive in fighting back here, because what I worry about is if you just look at the numbers, let's say Texas has 5 seats already, they're up. California's map passes, and that's not a guarantee, by the way, but let's say California's effort passes, and then they're back to 0. Well, then Republicans have all these state by state by state things. They're going one by one by one. They could still pick up half a dozen or more new seats. Doesn't mean
There you
that
go.
Democrats can't get beyond it, but it's clearly an unfair election when one party starts 6 seats up simply because they drew more maps. I mean, so that's the worry here if more Democratic states don't respond soon.
I don't think they're built for this fight and made for this moment, because I would at least threaten. If I was the governor of Colorado, I would go all in. If I was Westmore of Maryland, I'd go all in. Massachusetts, I'd go all in. New York, I'd go all in. The most populous states belong to the Democratic leadership in the blue states. But this is where we are, folks, because we still suffer from a failure of imagination, which is why I have Ari Berman on, investigative journalist and reporter from Mother Jones, who has a fantastic piece out that we're talking about the 10 ways that Republicans are planning to rig the election. And yes, they are planning to rig the election. None of this is normal. Asking a state to give 5 seats and then they deliver is not normal. Going against mail-in voting is not normal. Silencing and threatening your enemies is not normal. You have these 2 prongs as one of the 10 of how he's threatening Democrats and trying to silence his enemies like an authoritarian. Expand on that.
Yeah, this is really chilling, and I think this is an overall theme to the Trump administration, is just the level in which they're going after their political opponents, or turning people who are nonpartisan into political opponents simply for upholding the law, and then weaponizing the Justice Department to do it. So we've seen them do things like fire the head of the government's cybersecurity agency, Chris Krebs, for basically saying that the 2020 election was fair, revoking security clearances, throwing Democratic members of Congress in jail, trying to indict them. And then there's this whole broader
Well, even
weaponization.
can I interrupt you for a second? What's even worse with Chris Krebs is that poor guy was just doing his job, and under the Trump administration, right? He's like, nope, these elections were fair. And Donald Trump earlier this year in his second administration signed an executive order to actually investigate Miles Taylor, who was in the Department of Homeland Security, and Chris Krebs,
Yeah.
and specifically for treason.
It's crazy. I know, which as I think Trump noted at one point is punishable by death. So basically he did his job. He upheld the integrity of the election. He's far from some flaming liberal. I mean, these are people that worked for the Department of Homeland Security, and their job was to prevent threats from countries like China and Russia and Iran. I mean, they were protecting American national security by doing this. And they said the election was fair. This was bipartisan, Republican and Democratic officials who said this together. Trump went on the warpath against Krebs. This was in 2020, he started attacking him. Then he comes back in 2024. He revokes his security clearance. He threatens to investigate him for treason. Krebs has to leave his job. which at a big intelligence firm, because Trump's going to go after the security clearances of his colleagues, right? And he's done this with everyone. He's done this with law firms. He's done this with universities. I mean, he's trying to make the media. He's trying to get everyone to fall in line to have an authoritarian state. And the scary thing here is that this isn't just about one person. They've also completely dismantled efforts to fight foreign election interference, of course, because they're cozying up to places like Russia. So it makes sense they would do that. But it's very scary that basically all of the things that we built up after 2016 when Russia hacked Hillary Clinton's emails, that is all being dismantled right now. And it's going very much under the radar, but I'm really worried about what that can mean for 2026 and 2028.
Well, it's under the radar, but I try to keep the receipts. And speaking about that, about removing any of the barriers, removing the people who protect us from interference, such as Russian interference. That big piece of news that only lasted for a day, but I've tried my best to keep track of it, is that the 37 former and current intelligence officers who had their security clearances revoked, and most of them, their work was actually investigating Russia's interference in our elections, and they also removed the security of one person who was undercover. So literally putting a target on an undercover individual. The New York Times talked about it, right? So that's also another thing that happened last month, folks. So the people literally doing their jobs as patriots to protect us from foreign interference, specifically Russian interference, were targeted and punished by the Trump administration, right? So you're talking about, okay, I'm going to go down the list because so far I think you mentioned 5 of them, right? So you're going to essentially nationalize voter suppression. That's already happening. The gerrymandering, which is already happening. Silencing his enemies, which is already happening. He also, let's not forget, did the raid against John Bolton, and also FBI Director Kash Patel, who has no experience in law enforcement, openly bragged about having an enemies list before Trump was elected, targeting Democratic officials in particular, going after Lisa Cook, right, going after Letitia James, having no problem having his goons arrest Senator Padilla, having his, no problem arresting Mayor Baraka of New Jersey. What are some other ways?
Well, the weaponization, this gets into it, but the weaponization of the Justice Department, the fact that they've totally transformed the department's civil rights division from something that's supposed to protect civil rights, enforce laws like the Voting Rights Act, to basically now pressuring states to remove voters from their rolls. They're trying to get sensitive voter information from all 50 states. Trump tried this in his first term, remember, when he had this quote-unquote election integrity commission, and it backfired spectacularly. He was supposed to shut it down after there was no fraud, but they're trying again. They're trying to access voting equipment, places like Missouri and Colorado, which is extremely unusual. That absolutely seems like the prelude for them claiming that these machines are fraudulent in 2026. You have the thing that just came out yesterday with the Supreme Court decision that you talked about with Leah before, where they said that ICE can racially profile. I'm very concerned that that could be used in electoral context, because you've already had people like Steve Bannon say, we want ICE at the polls, right? And so you could easily imagine a situation in which voting takes place and ICE and the military have a presence at the polls. And I think that would have a huge chilling effect. And there absolutely would be eligible voters who would not turn out for some fear or another. And there definitely would be harassment and discrimination at the polls. And that is really scary, what the federal government could do to weaponize the federal government to go after people in an electoral context.
I think that's going to happen. And folks, remember in the 2024 election, especially in some blue cities where you had threats. Remember that?
Yeah.
Where they're trying to intimidate voters from not showing up. That happened just a couple of months ago. So I fully expect him to send the National Guard, the military, and masked armed ICE agents around voting booths and polls in blue dots and specifically blue cities, and saying, well, we've heard about violence, and we've heard about Antifa, and we've heard about Tren de Aragua, and that's why we need the presence of armed forces to ensure that we have a safe and secure election. And what specifically that's going to do, like you said, is not just even deter people from voting, because I'm like, F that, man. I don't want to take my kids and my wife to get hassled as a brown person. Black and brown people in particular, folks, it will deter them from voting, especially when you have in LA, where the Supreme Court said, yeah, go ahead and racially profile. It's a brown skinned guy. Doesn't matter if they're not doing anything wrong. They could be friggin' illegal. They could be undocumented. Go ahead and pick them up. So if there's even a 5% chance that, say, I'm in DC, or if I'm in Chicago, and if I'm in LA and I go and do my duty to vote, and that I might be harassed by masked armed ICE agents, Ari, if there was even a
Yeah.
5% chance, would you go?
No, I mean, and I think that that's kind of the whole point
Oh,
is
and then
to
no mail-in voting also. So you're stuck both ways.
yeah, I mean, I'm less confident Trump's gonna succeed on that front, in terms of banning mail-in voting because he doesn't have the power to do it, but I absolutely think he could abuse the power of ICE, and station them somewhere, and, I mean, this could happen sooner rather than later. We talked about California. They're voting in November on the redistricting map, whether or not it's gonna pass, and that could be a relatively close vote because if the Republicans oppose it, if some independents oppose it, you have people like Arnold Schwarzenegger speaking against it. There's rich Republican donors dropping a lot of money against it. And if Democrats are afraid to turn out, and let's say ICE is in LA and there's a stepped up in quote unquote enforcement, right? Let's say he starts announcing new enforcement efforts ahead of that vote, that could deter Democratic turnout already, right? In a state that in the 2028 in the presidential election wouldn't matter that much because it's a safe blue state. But now it's really important in terms of what might happen. And so yeah, it's very chilling what they might do. It's chilling that you already have Trump officials talking about this. You already have Bannon saying ICE is going to watch the polls. You also had Cleta Mitchell, a former
Oh,
Trump lawyer who helped try to overturn the election in 2020,
total freak.
say that she believes that Trump is going to invoke emergency powers to take control of elections, which is the exact thing that people are concerned about, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know that all of it's going to happen, but I think we absolutely have to be prepared for it to happen.
Okay, so Ari, anyone who's watched my show and has been reading me for several years, I have hypothesized and that Donald Trump, if everything goes bad, which I predicted it will, it's the world's worst, I told you so, I want no flowers, that what he would do is say that there is an invasion, that there is an insurrection, and the power vested in me by the Supreme Court and the Constitution, I have to protect the people. And if I were him, with this gutless Supreme Court that is my reek, my personal stamp of approval on anything and everything I want, folks. If you think I'm exaggerating, look at the emergency docket. They've essentially let him bat almost like 1,000. If I have the House, if I have the Senate, if I have the media, if I have corporate tycoons literally bending the knee last Thursday night, go check it out, that dinner, Tim Apple and Mark Zuckerberg sitting there filleting Donald Trump, right? What I would do, Ari, is I would say, you know what? By the power vested in me, I have to declare martial law. Oh, you're up against me? Insurrection Act. I will unleash the National Guard and the military. And don't you worry, folks. I'll just make everything stable and clean. I'll clean up crime, and then we'll have the elections. Don't you worry. And now you have Clea Mitchell essentially openly revealing the bond plot, right? Everything is set in place, Ari. And I know people might think, Waj, it can't happen here. And my response to that, Ari, is you're suffering from a failure of imagination. It is already happening. It is not normal to have armed National Guard members patrolling U.S. Capitol. It is not normal to have masked armed ICE agents going and picking up kids and family members in LA. It is not normal for the President of the United States to openly say, I want you to give me 5 seats, and Texas Republicans say, yes, master, yes, whatever you want. It is not normal for the president, after he invites Putin, lays out the red carpet, and Putin tells him, mail-in voting is bad. Mail-in voting is terrible. It is happening in real time. So when people say this won't happen, it is happening. And yesterday, again, the Supreme Court talking about, oh, the Supreme Court will hold him in check. They gave him a green light to unleash the Gestapo to terrorize brown people in LA. Speaking about the courts, another peg of this, and it's a big peg that has been ongoing ever since Justice Roberts went on the court. It has been his wet dream since he was a teenager, is to gut the Voting Rights Act. How are the Trump courts going to gut what remains of the Voting Rights Act?
That's right. I mean, some people dream of going to Disneyland. John Roberts dreams of destroying the Voting Rights Act. But no, I mean, the hypothetical you laid out is we had this conversation 10 years ago, it would have seemed insane. But I mean, every day this stuff seems more and more likely. I mean, even as I was writing my piece, which I started writing months ago, some of the things that I thought were sort of implausible that I laid out started happening, like the ICE being at the polls and stuff like that. I mean, people were like, I was having debates with election experts about like the feasibility of some of these things, and Trump's just doing them like one by one by one. And so, yeah, I think we have to be prepared for the worst. And I think the question is, would there be some kind of tipping point that would be too much for people to take? And that would require some Republicans in a country like this that's 50-50. It would require some Republicans to stand up like they did in 2020. And we don't know if they would do that again. But to your question, in terms of the courts, I mean, yeah, the courts have played a central role in this authoritarian takeover because they've weakened the Voting Rights Act in so many different ways. They ruled that states with a long history of discrimination no longer have to approve their voting changes with the federal government. So in the past, for example, if Texas draws a redistricting map that destroys districts represented by Black and Hispanic Democrats, that would have to be approved with the federal government. That's no longer the case. They've made it harder to strike down these kind of discriminatory laws. They've made it basically legalized partisan gerrymandering. That's one reason why Trump is able to go state by state by state. And now they're trying to kill the last remaining element of the Voting Rights Act, which basically is a prohibition on racial gerrymandering. So right now in southern states and other places, if there's a district that can be drawn to elect a candidate of color, that's protected under the Voting Rights Act. And they want to get rid of that. There was a case from Louisiana in the spring. It was supposed to be decided in June. Instead of deciding it, they punted it. And now they're basically going to look at whether or not you can use race. Again, this gets back to the LA case. They're basically saying, you can use race to racially profile with ICE stops, but you can't use race to draw a district that would rectify hundreds of years of discrimination in America. And so that would basically make the Voting Rights Act a dead letter. I think everyone believes this is going to happen because why else would they re-argue the case? And this is a court that, far from being ashamed of getting rid of the Voting Rights Act, I think they would wear it as a badge of honor. And, I've said for a long time, if the Voting Rights Act is weak, American democracy is weak. And we've seen what has happened in the years since the Voting Rights Act has been gutted. And the court just seems to be willing to do anything it can to limit voting rights for people it doesn't like.
And folks, when I said that John Roberts, his wet dream as a teenager was to gut the Voting Rights Act, I was only partially joking. This has been his dream to gut the Voting Rights Act, and now he has a chance to finally take the final scalpel and kill it, and I think they will. Not do I think they will, they're going to kill it, folks. Believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. Look at the Supreme Court. Look what it's done. And what I've said, Ari, and you mentioned this again, is about racism. I've said the two sins of America that we've refused to confront and kill, which is why we're in the situation that we're in, is racism and greed, white supremacy and unfettered capitalism. And the manifestation of those sins is Donald Trump. And it goes back to race and specifically North Carolina. I'm so glad in your piece you mentioned what happened in North Carolina, because I've been trying to follow what's been happening in North Carolina for a while, because they're so egregious in North Carolina to essentially rig the state, which honestly, it should be a purple state. It's not really a red state. And I remember reading a case where a judge, and I'm forgetting this exact quote, but it always stayed in my mind, where he said with like almost surgical accuracy, they went after Black voters in North Carolina. Talk to us about the North Carolina model now being used across the nation.
Yeah, North Carolina passed a sweeping voter suppression law back in 2013, and the courts found in 2016 that it targeted Black voters, in the court's words, with almost surgical precision. And it was amazing to read this opinion, because they were talking about stuff that happened in 2016. I mean, it wasn't 1966. It wasn't 1866. I mean, it was 2016 where they found that you had a Republican legislature that was targeting Black voters with almost surgical precision. But I wrote about North Carolina in my piece because your followers may have remembered there was a state Supreme Court election in 2024. The Republican candidate lost by about 700 votes. Instead of conceding, he tried to overturn the election, much like Trump did, targeting mail-in ballots, going after votes only cast by Democratic constituencies and Democratic counties. But the thing that was really eye-opening to me and disturbing about it was, unlike Trump, he won a number of times in the courts. He won before the Republican-dominated Court of Appeals. He won before the Republican-dominated state court. They were about to throw out enough ballots before a Trump judge in the federal courts told them to certify the election. So, I mean, it literally required a Trump-nominated judge at the federal level to get involved. And you could easily imagine another scenario where a different Trump judge says something different, rules with the state Republicans. It goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. They rule, and you actually would have had an election overturned. So what I'm saying in the piece is, even though that was a much less high-profile race than Trump in 2020, I think it's even more of a model than Trump 2020 for Republicans because they got a lot further. And this was, I mean, they basically called it a nonviolent insurrection, what he was
Yep.
trying to do. And
Yep.
that's ultimately more successful because if you go through a quote unquote legal process, right? And you have the respectable lawyers. You don't have the Four Seasons total landscaping form of election denialism. You have the kind of
Deep cut, but a good cut. Deep cut.
suit and tie country club republicanism, election denialism. That is going to be palatable to some people. And so it's scary how normalized that was. And you absolutely can bet that that's something that is going to come up again. The only reason we didn't have this fight in 2024 is because Trump won. Right? I mean, if Trump lost, they were absolutely going to try to overturn the election with many more of their loyalists in place. And so now in 2026, you have to look at who's controlling these election boards because they also took over the election board in North Carolina. So, I mean, the same kind of things we were worried about, we're going to have to keep an eye on for 2026 if Democrats overcome all this stuff. Overcome the gerrymandering, overcome the voter suppression. Then you're going to have to say, will the votes be counted? And the last scenario that I laid out in my piece was what happens if it goes before the U.S. House? What happens if, for example, it's a
Well,
close
can I
election?
quote you? Can I
Yeah.
quote you? Because you're on a roll here, and I just want to. I'm so glad you mentioned that case in North Carolina because it came down to this just one judge, and I want to remind everyone in 2021 it was Mike Pence, upon the advice of conservative Justice Luttig, and also Dan Quayle. He called him for advice. He prayed, "What should I do?" Donald Trump and the Republican base is telling me not to certify the election. And Dan Quayle, the hero that we never knew that we needed, told Mike, "Do your job." So Mike Pence then listened to the Justice Luttig, who was retired at the time, and Dan Quayle did his job, certified the election. Then he was running for his life on January 6, 2021. People forget how close we were to this coming to the insurrection succeeding. And I believe the coup, the coup won, folks. The MAGA coup won. They control the House, they control the Senate, they control corporate America, they control corporate media, they control the Supreme Court. That just gave them a green light to racially profile. And the last peg that you have in your 10 ways that Trump and MAGA will try to rig and steal the election, it's called blocking election certification. I just want to quote you, and I want to unleash Ari. Quote, imagine this scenario. Control of the House isn't called on election night 2026. The balance of power depends on one or more close race in California, which can take weeks to count votes. Trump alleges widespread fraud, making spurious claims about post-election vote dumps and non-citizens voting. The president pressures Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who voted against certifying the electoral votes from Arizona and Pennsylvania in 2020, and supported a lawsuit to overturn that presidential election in 4 battleground states, not to seat any Democrats in disputed elections. The Speaker persuades the House, while it is still under GOP control before the next Speaker is chosen, to block members of California's delegation, plunging the body into chaos. End quote.
Yeah, and I mean that is again what could seem like a far-fetched scenario that I think is entirely possible, which is that the Republicans claim, based on no evidence, some kind of fraud if they're losing. They blame blue states. Could be a blue state like California that takes a while to count votes because they have a large number of mail-in ballots. And so then you would have a situation where the House is technically, quote unquote, up for grabs, and they basically refuse to seat the Democratic members because that could be the difference. And under that scenario, this hasn't happened a lot in modern times, but under that scenario, the House would basically set up its own procedures and would either try to override state level certification, or in the case if it was something like North Carolina, where there wasn't a certification, they then would decide whether to certify the election themselves. And so I do not want Mike Johnson making that decision. But it's certainly possible that could happen. And one of the things I went back on, I was curious about this, is what's the history of contested elections in the House? And after Reconstruction was overthrown. So basically, in the period after the Civil War, in which there were Black members of Congress elected from Southern states, but white Southerners didn't like it, there was these disputed elections in the House, and it frequently occurred that the white members of the House voted out the Black members of Congress who were legally elected from places like South Carolina and Florida and Louisiana. So I found this to be a really chilling history that I didn't really know that much about. And so, I mean, there is some precedent for the House doing this. Again, hopefully it doesn't get to this. But again, that is something. I mean, it would kind of be like you said. It would be January 6, 2021 all over again, except, instead of Trump leaning on Pence, he's going to be leaning on Mike Johnson, who presumably is a lot more subservient, and also his own job would theoretically be on the line.
The same Mike Johnson who really, 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 really believes in God and prays a lot, and on Friday said, without any evidence, that Donald Trump was an FBI informant, and then walked it back. I think Mike Johnson will be not calling Dan Quayle in Justice Ludwig. Mike Johnson will be probably calling, I don't know, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and JD Vance and Donald Trump. And then when Donald Trump tells him to do whatever he wants, Mike Johnson will say, yes, King. Folks, there are 900 people watching. I think this is one of the most important conversations I've had. Ari's come on 3 times. I should give him a jacket or a left hook mug by now. For those who are joining us a bit late, Ari Berman is a reporter, senior reporter for Mother Jones, and it's an excellent article, which I will link to, 10 ways that Republicans plan on rigging the election. He's not a conspiracy theorist. This is not a commentary piece. He has been on this for years. It's all facts. You have to trust the evidence of your eyes and your ears. Stop suffering from a failure imagination. Take Trump literally and seriously. As I was telling Leah Littman, I kept that receipt from October before the election when he, quoting Hitler yet again, said that he will unleash the National Guard and the military against the enemies from within. People said, no, he won't. You're crazy, Waj. And lo and behold, there's 2,000 armed National Guard members 20 minutes away from me in the nation's capital. The Supreme Court, this corrupt piece of shit Supreme Court, just gave him, said, A-OK for racial profiling, for them to terrorize brown people in LA. Speaking about LA, I saw my former co-host Francesca's on here. Francesca, hey, thanks so much for joining. Have Ari on your show. And folks, we're having a Democratic Party which is having a crisis of leadership, because I would expect, Ari, and this is my final question to you, but take your time. I don't want to rush you. I'm mindful of your time. He's telling you what he's going to do. They have revealed the Bond supervillain plot. They have given it to you in the form of Project 2025. You have Donald Trump saying, find me 100 seats for the 2026. You see Texas saying, yes, sir. You're seeing Missouri saying, yes, sir. He says mail-in voting. He's taken away the clearance of the CIA officers and intelligence officers who tried to protect us from election interference. He has election deniers, right, now overseeing the elections. He has ICE agents terrorizing brown folks. We know what he is going to do. He is doing it, all right? What do you want? Democrats, because they still have governors, they're still mayors in the Senate, 47, right? It's a very close house, like just, by like a Hitler mustache hair. Republicans have it. Donald Trump is underwater in the economy. The job numbers are terrible, folks. Inflation just came out right now. Inflation wiped out economic. Washington Post just 20 minutes ago. Inflation wiped out income gains of 2024, but the rich got richer. Epstein files is not going away. They have stuff here, Ari, to fight. How do you want them to fight?
Well, I think that number one, the Democratic Party needs an overall plan to fight authoritarianism. And I don't think that they have that blueprint right now. And I don't think they've made this the most important issue. I think Democrats think this election is going to be decided based on the unpopularity of the big, beautiful bill. And of course, like that's going to factor into it. This is not going to be a policy election. This is going to be an election about whether we have an election, whether we can have a democratic election. Because right now, with gerrymandering and this other stuff, the election's being predetermined. There are no competitive elections in those 5 Texas districts, really, that they've redrawn, where they might have been competitive in the past. So you're just taking competitive seats off the board. And what I want to see is I want to see the Democratic Party fight every day to protect democracy in the same kind of way that Republicans are fighting every day to take away democracy. And I don't see that same passion. I see some of them having that passion. It seemed crazy when Gavin Newsom said originally, we're going to circumvent their independent redistricting commission, put this before the voters, and combat Texas. People were like, that's insane. He can't do that. Well, they're doing it, right? And they found a way to do it in a way that's ethical and legal and makes a lot of sense. But that was like, in whatever, I'm sure there was his own politics behind it. I'm not saying like Gavin Newsom is totally pure in his motives. But the point is like, that was someone who said, what power do we have and what can we do, right? And I would like to see, every Dem member of Congress, every Democratic governor, every Democratic mayor, the leadership of both parties have that same sense of urgency here to understand, like, this is not just going to be about the unpopularity of Trump's policies. We have to have a situation where people can be able to voice their dissent. And those unpopular policies can actually lead to an outcome where people are removed from office. And so I don't see that urgency. I see some urgency, but I don't see enough urgency. I see the Democratic Party continuing to turn its back on people that are bringing new people into the political process, like with
Mamdani,
Mamdani
go
in New
away.
York. I mean, the most promising person they've had in this year, the freshest voice they have, they can't even endorse him. I mean, theoretically, Zoran Mamdani would be a much better protection against authoritarianism than Eric Adams running the city of New York right now, who is allowing ICE and working with the Trump administration to back their mass deportation agenda. But so I don't see that from the Democratic Party. But the last thing I'll say is that this is going to have to require more than the Democratic Party, right? The way the election held in 2020 was it required Republicans to stand up to their own leader. And that's the kind of thing that I think would be very, very hard to imagine being replicated today. Either those officials have been chased out of the party, fired from their jobs, some of them are still there, or they're now towing the party line. And so the question for me is, yes, absolutely, there should be pressure on the Democrats. But what about all the Republicans as well here? What are they going to do to stand up for democracy? Because some of these things, I mean, we've talked about a lot of ways Trump is targeting Democrats, but some of these things could blow back on Republicans, right? I mean, if Iran hacks the election, you think they're gonna help the Republicans based on this current administration? And so I think that we need a bipartisan coalition here to protect democracy. It can't just be the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is too weak and disorganized and doesn't have enough power to protect democracy on its own. So it's going to take the same bipartisan coalitions we had in 2020 and people speaking up and basically saying that they're not going to tolerate this in their own communities and they're not going to tolerate this in their own daily lives to try to stand up against this.
I think it was very well said when he said this election is about whether or not we have future elections. And people still are suffering from a failure of imagination. They always keep saying it can't happen here. It is happening here. Donald Trump is not leaving, legally or peacefully. He's not leaving, folks. He has 2028 hats. What more do you need to see? He's openly telling people to gerrymander for him. They're openly telling people to suppress votes, and they're doing it. I do not think you're going to get the Republican elected officials. This is my quick response to you in the three ways where I think we might barely have a chance. Number one, when it comes to Republicans, the only thing that tracks them is the Epstein files. I think Epstein, and Steve Bannon said this, they can't afford to lose 10%. He's afraid that they'll lose 10% of the base on Epstein. That's why I say Epstein, Epstein, Epstein. In addition to getting justice for all the women and the survivors, this is the one of two Achilles cankles of Donald Trump, the Epstein files. It's the only bipartisan issue, Ari, that is uniting independents, Democrats, and Republicans. And he's stuck in the shit when it comes to the Epstein files. In about 15 minutes, folks, I'm going to have Lev Parnas and Zev Shalev talk about Epstein and why I think it's a really big issue. Also, the other Achilles cankle that he has is the economy. The economy is this just came out, folks. The job numbers even lower than we anticipated. Inflation wiped out all income gains, and some economists are already using the word recession and stagflation. White farmers, I don't know if you saw it over the weekend, they're literally praying. They're praying to God because they're screwed. Suicides going up. So if you can peel off a few, even 5 to 10% of MAGA voters, that's all I'm asking for. 5 to 10%. I'm being very realistic. I think that's going to be no bueno for Republicans. I have no faith in the Republican elected officials. I think they're all going to bend the knee. For Democrats, Ari, I think this current leadership isn't built for this fight. They're not made for this moment. I don't have any faith in the Democrats. That doesn't mean you can't push them because we've seen Gavin Newsom respond to the loud critical push. They read all the numbers. You've seen Ro kind of go more progressive. You've seen them now say, okay, maybe we have to support Mamdani. I think a year is a lot can happen in a year, folks. That's why it's so important to keep pressuring them because at least with the Democrats, they're amenable to you moving them through pressure, right? So that's why you have to keep being really loud. That being said, Ari, I don't think this current leadership of Schumer and Jeffries can get it done, but it's our job to keep moving people like Newsom and Westmore and all the other governors. And then finally, the third thing I would say, and I want your quick take on this before I let you go, I think we need to shut this shit down. Shut it down. I think we have to shut down the government. We have to do strikes. And I think the Democrats should say, we are not going to fund this government because this government is now being used as an instrument to terrorize the American public. Your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Democrats have to use the leverage they have, the power they have to try to hold people accountable. They're basically making it seem like, oh, we'll do it after the midterms. Well, again, our entire conversation has been about whether we're going to have a free and fair midterm election. So you can't wait until the midterms. And this may be their only point of leverage to extract some kind of concessions or to get some kind of accountability, even a sliver of it, from Trump. And so I do think that they have to stop giving Trump what he wants because the minute they give him anything, he just takes more and more and more. We've already seen that Republicans don't care anything about norms or rules or even adverse court rulings. And so, yes, I think we definitely need a more confrontational Democratic Party. I think there's very few leaders in the Democratic Party that know how to deal with someone like Donald Trump. You could probably count a handful. I think Bernie, AOC, and Mamdani have been I would say only three of the only people that understand how to deal with someone like Trump, which is you have to harness the anti-establishment support that Trump has from the other side and say, yes, politics is fucked. Politics is corrupt. The system is broken, but this is how we fix it, as opposed to making it more corrupt, more broken, and more self-serving, which is what Trump's trying to do. And so when the Democratic Party tries to fight someone like Trump, who's basically kind of an anti-establishment populist, with the embrace of the status quo, that doesn't work. Didn't work in 2016. It only worked in 2020 because of COVID, and it didn't work in 2024. And so we need the Democratic Party to understand that the rules as you understood them no longer apply. There are new rules now, and they have to try to harness the energy of people that are mad at the system, but to try to make the system better.
I had Abdul Al-Sayed, who's running for a Democrat 2026 Senate from Michigan. I talked to him about this, and I said, whoever embraces the anti-establishment economic populist message wins. It's a wide open lane. The problem is Democrats have to give up the corporate teat. Will they? I don't know. It's a wide open lane, folks. It's the anti-establishment economic populist message. The people who voted for Trump in 2024 also voted for AOC. The people who voted for Trump in 2024 are also supporting Mamdani. And the people who voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020 also like this guy, Bernie Sanders. Ari, fantastic conversation. It's a fantastic piece. It's called Project 2026, Trump's Plan to Rig the Next Election. It just came out in Mother Jones yesterday. I will have this conversation up for the nearly 1,000 people who are watching. The 10 ways that Donald Trump and Republicans are going to try to rig the election, folks. It's all out there. Like the most helpful Bond villain, they're telling you the plot. The question is, what will we do in response? I'm going to do it to a little break at 4:10. I'm going to have Lev Parnas and Zev Shalev talk about the Epstein files and why that is such a weakness for Donald Trump that should be exploited. And folks, we'll be back. Ari, before I let you go, shamelessly promote yourself.
You can find my work at motherjones.com. You can buy my books, Minority Rule and Give Us the Ballot, wherever books are sold. And you can follow me on Blue Sky at Ari Berman and whatever comes after that.
Folks, this is the Left Hook. No paywalls ever. If you aren't a subscriber, please subscribe. If you have a few bucks, I have 800 kids. Let me feed one of them. Become a paid subscriber. If not, this is a very important conversation. I'll have it up in an hour, so it'll be on my Substack. Please share it. Just share it with people. It's all free. I've kept no paywalls. Citizens have to be informed as we fight for our democracy and against an authoritarian regime. Yes, I said it. I'll be back in 20 minutes at 4:10 p.m. with Lev and Zev to talk about Donald Trump being an FBI informant. Did you know that, Ari? He was an FBI. Oh, no, he wasn't. Oh, he was closest friends with Epstein. Oh, no. Oh, my bad. We'll figure it all out. We'll be back at 4:10 p.m. Thanks, everyone. Be kind, be decent, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Ari, take care.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.